Ambassador James Roberts stood at the observation window of the scary diplomatic station, watching crystalline beings float gracefully through the near-freezing corridors. Their translucent bodies refracted the stark lighting, creating prismatic displays that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. But right now, all he could think about was his daughter's excited voice just 3 hours ago. "Daddy, they look like the ice sculptures from Christmas." The memory made his hands clench into fists. Emma had been so fascinated by everything aboard the station, her blue eyes wide with wonder as she took in humanity's first contact with an alien civilization. The scary had seemed equally intrigued by her, their crystalline forms vibrating in what their cultural liaison had described as harmonious curiosity. "Ambassador." A synthetic voice translated the approaching scary diplomat's crystalline chimes. "Your emotional frequencies are causing disturbance patterns. Please maintain composure." Roberts turned slowly, facing the 12-foot-tall crystalline being. Its faceted surface showed no expression. They never did. But the subtle shifts in its internal lattice structure suggested what humans had learned to interpret as condescension. "Where is my daughter?" His voice was quiet, controlled, but laden with the kind of threat that transcended species barriers. The scary's upper spires rotated slightly. The juvenile specimen was found to be an excellent subject for our evolutionary comparison studies. Her rapid cellular regeneration rate is quite remarkable for such a primitive organic form. We had not anticipated such severe reactions to standard sampling procedures. Robert's training as a diplomat warred with his instincts as a father. "You took samples from my 8-year-old daughter without consent." "Consent is a curious organic construct," the scary chimed. "We operate on the principle of advancing universal knowledge. Your offspring's genetic structure provided valuable data about your species' developmental stages." A medical officer, human, thankfully, rushed into the observation room. "Ambassador, sir, we've stabilized Emma's condition." But the woman's face was pale. The radiation exposure from their sampling has caused severe cellular damage. "We need to get her to Earth immediately for specialized treatment." The scary diplomat's crystals chimed in what might have been interest. The specimen proved less resilient than anticipated. However, the data gathered will advance our understanding of organic limitations, a worthwhile exchange. Roberts moved before he could stop himself, his fist connecting with the diplomat's crystalline surface. Pain shot through his hand as several fingers broke, but he had the satisfaction of seeing a small crack appear in the alien's outer layer. The temperature in the room plummeted as several scary security units materialized, their forms sharp and aggressive. The medical officer stepped back, eyes wide with fear. "This reaction is precisely why organic life forms are considered primitive," the diplomat chimed, internal structures pulsing with what might have been anger. "Your emotional responses override logic. Violence over understanding. Chaos over order." Roberts straightened, ignoring his throbbing hand. "You want to understand humans. You're about to. You didn't just endanger a child. You endangered my child. Earth will respond accordingly." "Your threats are meaningless," the diplomat chimed. "Your species cannot operate in our environmental conditions. Your weapons cannot penetrate our crystalline forms. Your ships cannot breach our absolute zero barriers." Roberts smiled then, a cold expression that made even the crystalline beings shift slightly. "You think you know cold." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You have no idea what humans born in the cold can do. You're about to learn why Earth's apex predators evolved in the Ice Age." He turned to the medical officer. "Get Emma to the ship. Now." Then he activated his emergency comm link to Earth Command. The message was brief, just 5 words. "Arctic Warriors. Full deployment. My authority." As he watched his unconscious daughter being rushed to the emergency shuttle, Roberts thought about the scary's dismissive attitude toward primitive organic life. They were about to learn why testing humanity's limits, especially through a child, was the last mistake many species would ever make. The temperature might have been dropping in the station, but on Earth, the Arctic warriors were already gearing up, and they were about to teach these aliens the true meaning of cold. Colonel Anastasia Volkov stood motionless in the howling Antarctic blizzard, her breath steady despite the -50 degrees Celsius temperature threatening to freeze the moisture in her lungs. Around her, 12 recruits struggled through their final qualification test, a 10-mile trek through the worst weather Earth could summon. Only the tough survived here. Only the exceptional thrived. Her augmented vision picked up the sudden burst of light in her peripheral vision. Priority override from Earth Command. The message was brief, but its implications massive. Child endangered by scary. Arctic warriors authorized. Full deployment. Time to hunt, she whispered, the words crystallizing in the bitter air. She raised her tactical hood's audio projection. Training canceled. All units returned to base. We have a situation. Within 20 minutes, her elite team assembled in the underground facility known as the Den. 30 warriors, each born in Earth's harshest cold regions, each trained since childhood to turn extreme environments into weapons. They weren't just soldiers, they were the product of generations of human adaptation to killing cold. The scary have committed an act of war, Volkov announced, projecting the medical data from Emma Roberts' preliminary scans. They experimented on a human child, treating her like a lab rat. Their station maintains near absolute zero temperatures. They think this makes them untouchable. Her smile was sharp as a glacier's edge. Let's prove them wrong. Lieutenant James Frost Morrison, raised in the Canadian Arctic, studied the scary station schematics. Their crystalline structure is vulnerable to specific sonic frequencies if we modify our resonators. Already done, interrupted Dr. Sarah Winters, their chief technologist. She gestured to the advanced suits lined up along the wall. The new Fenris armor incorporates everything we've learned about surviving extreme cold. Plus, her eyes gleamed, it can absorb and weaponize their cold-based defenses. Volkov ran her hand along the closest suit's surface. Its dark material seemed to drink in the light, covered in patterns reminiscent of wolf fur. Time from deployment to target. The Frost Fang can get us there in 4 hours, Morrison replied. Stealth systems should get us past their outer defenses. After that, he grinned. We do what we do best. As her team geared up, Volkov received another transmission, this time from Ambassador Roberts himself. His face appeared on her HUD, strained but composed. Colonel, the scary believe their environment makes them invincible. They see us as primitive organics who can't possibly threaten them. They're about to learn the difference between creatures who hide in the cold, Volkov replied, checking her weapons, and predators who hunt in it. How's your daughter? Critical, but stable. The doctors. He paused, composing himself. They say if we'd found her an hour later, we'd have lost her. Volkov's expression hardened. The scary, like many advanced species, had forgotten something crucial about humanity. They looked at human technology, at human diplomacy, and thought they understood human capability. They didn't realize these were just tools. The real weapon was what humans became when you threatened their young. Wolves of winter, she addressed her team as they boarded the Frost Fang. For millennia, humanity has adapted to the cold. We've learned its secrets, mastered its power. The scary think their crystalline forms and freezing stations make them superior. She activated her suit, watching as others did the same. The low hum of advanced technology merged with the sound of 30 warriors breathing in perfect sync. They're about to learn what every apex predator knows. There's always something higher up the food chain. The Frost Fang's engines ignited, barely a whisper despite their immense power. As Earth fell away behind them, Volkov thought about the scary's dismissive attitude toward primitive organic life. They were about to discover why Earth's deadliest hunters had evolved in the depths of the Ice Age. And this time, the hunters were bringing technology that made the Ice Age look warm. The scary monitoring station registered the anomaly first, a shadow where no shadow should exist, moving through their outer defense grid like a ghost. By the time they recognized the Frost Fang's signature, it was too late. The Arctic warriors had already begun their insertion. "Impossible," chimed the scary defense coordinator, its crystalline form vibrating with distress. "Their organic technology cannot function at these temperatures. We maintain the barrier at 3 degrees above absolute zero." "Impossible is what humans do best," Colonel Volkov's voice echoed through their command center. The Scary's crystalline forms shifted in shock. Their communications were supposed to be unbreakable. "Did you think you were the first to master the cold?" The first breach came at Junction 17. The station's sensors registered a localized temperature drop that shouldn't have been possible. Then another, and another. The Scary warriors deployed to investigate found only empty corridors, frost patterns spreading across their crystalline walls like predatory fractals. "Contact." Lieutenant Morrison's voice was cold and clear in Volkov's tactical feed. "They're trying to drop the temperature further. Permission to demonstrate our appreciation." "Granted." Volkov smiled beneath her helm as she led her own team deeper into the station. "Show them what happens when you corner wolves." The Scary never stood a chance. Their first warrior shattered when Morrison's team unveiled their sonic resonators. The crystalline alien's impossible scream harmonized with the weapon's frequency, creating a cascade effect that turned its own lattice structure against itself. The fragments hadn't finished falling before 3 more Scary suffered the same fate. "Their arrogance is their weakness," Dr. Winters commented over the tactical net, monitoring the battle through the team's sensors. "They never conceived that organics could not just survive these temperatures, but thrive in them. Each cold-based defense they activate just feeds more power to your suits." Volkov's team encountered heavy resistance near the central laboratories. The Scary had finally realized the threat, deploying their elite guard, massive crystalline forms that towered 15 feet high, armed with weapons that could freeze matter at the molecular level. "Your primitive attack ends here," their leader chimed, the translation carrying notes of both fear and defiance. "Surrender, and we may preserve samples of your remarkable adaptation for study." Volkov's response was pure action. Her suit absorbed the first freezing blast, converting its energy into a kinetic burst that shattered 2 of the guards. Her team moved like shadows through the chaos, their modified weapons finding resonant frequencies that turned the Scary's crystalline forms into their greatest vulnerability. "You know what your kind never understood about us, primitive organics." Volkov addressed the remaining guards as her team surrounded them. "We don't just adapt to survive. We adapt to win." The battle ended in minutes. The elite guard, the Scary's ultimate warriors, lay in glittering shards across the laboratory floor. Their leader, now webbed with cracks, backed away from the advancing humans. What are you?" it chimed, its translation wavering with incomprehension. "We're the descendants of creatures that hunted mammoths across ice sheets," Volkov replied, checking the structural integrity of the laboratory walls. "Our ancestors survived ice ages without technology. Then we learned to make tools, to master the cold that once threatened us." She paused, letting her next words carry full weight. "And now we're here to teach you why threatening our children was your worst mistake." The Scary leader's form shuddered. The child was merely a research subject. We meant no. The resonator pulse that shattered it was almost gentle. Volkov stepped through the crystalline debris, leading her team deeper into the station. They had broken the unbreakable, destroyed the elite, but their true mission was just beginning. "Control room secured," Morrison reported. "You're not going to believe what we found in their research files." "On my way," Volkov responded, her voice carrying the chill of humanity's darkest winters. "Let's show these advanced beings what primitive really means." The Scary High Command received the battle feeds with growing horror. Their crystalline forms vibrated in frequencies that hadn't been recorded in millennia. Pure, primal fear. On every screen, the Arctic warriors moved through their impenetrable defenses like wraiths, turning the station's absolute zero environment into a weapon. Magnificent, isn't it? Dr. Winter's voice cut through their command frequency again. Did you know that Earth has creatures that can survive being completely frozen? Wood frogs, for instance. Their hearts stop, their blood freezes, and yet they thaw and hop away when spring comes. We studied them, learned from them, improved upon their techniques. Another section of the station went dark. The scary commanders watched helplessly as their warriors, armed with cold-based weapons that had conquered dozens of species, fired desperately at the human invaders. Each blast was absorbed by their strange, dark suits, leaving frost patterns that resembled ancient Earth cave paintings, wolves on the hunt. Interesting design choice, one of the scary scientists chimed, studying the patterns. They're not random. They're intimidation tactics. Colonel Volkov interrupted, her team suddenly materializing in the command center. No alarms had sounded. No sensors had triggered. Humans learned long ago that fear is as effective as any weapon. The patterns tell our prey what we are, hunters born in the dark and cold. The scary commanders raised their weapons. Volkov's team didn't even bother to dodge. Please, Lieutenant Morrison's voice carried genuine amusement. Try your cold weapons again. We need to recharge anyway. The crystalline aliens hesitated, their internal structures shifting in patterns of confusion and dawning comprehension. Everything they'd believed about organic limitations had been wrong. These humans hadn't just survived in the cold, they'd mastered it at a level the scary hadn't thought possible. The child, the head commander chimed. You've done all this for one immature specimen. The temperature in the command center dropped so rapidly that even the scary felt it. Frost crept across their crystalline forms, finding microfractures they hadn't known existed. Her name is Emma, Volkov said softly, the kind of softness that preceded avalanches. She's 8 years old. She likes ice skating and hot chocolate. She wants to be an astronaut. And you treated her like a lab rat. We are scientists, another commander protested. The advancement of knowledge. The sonic pulse shattered him mid-sentence. The remaining commanders backed away, their crystalline forms vibrating in frequencies of pure terror. Knowledge. Morrison laughed. Let us share some knowledge. Humans evolved to be persistence hunters. We followed prey until they collapsed from exhaustion. In the cold, we learned to move silently across ice and snow, to track for days without rest. We made the frozen wasteland our home. And then, Dr. Winters added through the comm, we took those survival traits and enhanced them. The suits you're facing, they're not just technology. They're an extension of what we already were. Apex predators adapted to the most hostile environments Earth could produce. Volkov raised her hand, frost swirling around her fingers. But you want to know our greatest adaptation, our strongest survival trait. She gestured to her team, who began placing sonic resonators at strategic points around the command center. We learned to protect our young, at any cost. The head commander's crystalline form shifted, attempting to project authority it no longer possessed. What are your terms? Terms. Volkov's laugh carried echoes of Arctic winds. Oh, you misunderstand. This isn't a negotiation. This is a demonstration. We're going to show you exactly what happens to anyone who harms our children. And then, if you survive the lesson, you're going to share it with every species in known space. The resonators activated, their frequencies building slowly. The scary commanders watched in horror as their own crystalline structure began to sympathetically vibrate. Welcome, Volkov said, to humanity's cold equation. Deep within the scary station, past the shattered remains of their elite guards, and through corridors now decorated with crystalline debris, Colonel Volkov's team discovered the true extent of the aliens' research. The laboratory complex sprawled across 3 decks, each level more disturbing than the last. Life signs detected, Morrison reported, his suit's sensors piercing the ultra-cold darkness. Multiple signatures, small. His voice caught slightly. Colonel, they're all child-sized. Volkov's tactical display lit up with readings. Dozens of stasis pods lined the walls, their surfaces clouded with layers of supercooled gases. Through the frost, small figures were barely visible. Dr. Winters, Volkov's voice was deadly calm. Can you access their research logs? Already done. The scientist's voice shook with barely controlled rage. They've been collecting children from every spacefaring race they've encountered. Their reasoning, God. They believe juvenile specimens provide the purest data about species limitations. The nearest pod surface cleared as Morrison wiped away the frost. Inside, a small reptilian child floated in suspended animation, scales dulled by prolonged exposure to extreme cold. The pod's readout showed it had been there for 3 months. Illyrian. Morrison identified the species. Their ambassador's son went missing during trade negotiations. The Scary claimed their ship had detected no unauthorized boardings. Another pod contained a young Centaurian, their normally iridescent skin gone pale. Next to it, a Proximan child, barely old enough to have developed their secondary sensory organs. 27 pods, Dr. Winters reported. 18 different species. The longest has been here for almost a year. Their survival rates. She paused. Emma was lucky. We found her in time. Volkov approached a central console, its crystalline surface reflecting her suit's frost patterns. Can we safely revive them? Yes, but we'll need specialized medical support for each species. I'm already contacting their homeworlds through secure channels. The Illyrians are closest. They can have a medical ship here in 6 hours. A sound echoed through the laboratory. Crystal on crystal. A scary scientist emerged from a hidden alcove, its form smaller than the warriors they'd encountered, covered in what appeared to be specialized research attachments. You don't understand, it chimed, the translation carrying notes of frustrated condescension. These subjects are providing invaluable data about organic adaptability, their recovery rates, their cellular responses to extreme conditions. We're learning how to improve all organic life. Morrison raised his weapon, but Volkov held up a hand. She approached the scientist slowly, her suit's frost patterns swirling into increasingly complex designs. Improve. Her voice was soft, nearly gentle. You think torturing children improves anything? Their suffering is minimal, the scientist protested. Our stasis technology. Record this, Volkov commanded her team's systems. Every species whose children are here needs to see what we found. They need to understand exactly what the Scary's scientific pursuit really means. She turned back to the scientist. You know what fascinates me. You think your crystalline form makes you superior. You think your mastery of cold makes you untouchable. But you never asked yourselves why Earth's most dangerous predators evolved in the coldest climates. The scientist's form shifted nervously. Your threats air. Not threats, Volkov interrupted. Education. You see, cold doesn't just preserve. It doesn't just limit. Cold. She raised her hand, frost gathering around her fingers. Cold kills. And we learned to kill with it. The scientist barely had time to move before the modified resonator pulse hit it. Its crystalline form didn't shatter instantly like the others. Instead, cracks spread slowly, methodically, turning its transparent body opaque with thousands of fracture lines. Begin revival sequences, Volkov ordered as the scientist crashed to the floor in pieces. Priority to the most recently captured. Morrison, set up a defensive perimeter. Dr. Winters, I want every piece of data from their systems copied and transmitted to Earth Command. She looked at the pods, each containing a child who'd been stolen, experimented on, treated like a specimen instead of a living being. The frost patterns on her suit swirled faster, matching her rising fury. The galaxy's about to learn that humanity doesn't just survive the cold, she whispered. We've become it. They're attempting to initiate emergency protocols. Dr. Winters' voice crackled through the tactical net. The Scary are dropping the station's temperature to quantum stillpoint. Even our suits have limits, Colonel. Volkov watched as her HUD displayed the plummeting temperature readings. The Scary were desperate, pushing their environmental systems beyond design tolerances. At these temperatures, conventional physics began to break down. Most races would consider this suicide. They still don't understand. Morrison laughed. The sound sharp as breaking ice. Doctor, activate the Fenris protocol. The suit's external layers shifted, the wolf-like patterns beginning to pulse with a deep blue light. Microscopic channels within the armor's structure opened, revealing technology reverse-engineered from Earth's most extreme survivors. Water bears, Dr. Winters announced proudly as the suits adapted. Tardigrades, Arctic fish with natural antifreeze in their blood. The Scary thought they understood cold. They never truly studied Earth's microfauna. The station's temperature dropped past the point where even the Scary's crystalline forms should have become brittle. Warning signals flashed across every surface, their alien script telling the story of systems pushed to breaking point. Team status. Volkov demanded, moving her team through corridors now cold enough to shatter normal matter. All functioning, Morrison reported. Better than functioning. The colder they make it, the more power our suits absorb. Basic thermodynamics. You can't destroy energy, only convert it. They reached the station's environmental control center to find it barricaded by the remaining Scary leadership. The crystalline aliens had modified their forms, growing layers of defensive lattices that made them look like living glaciers. Your persistence is remarkable, the station commander chimed, its translation carrying genuine amazement. But this ends now. No organic life can survive quantum stillpoint. Your bodies will freeze at the atomic level. Volkov stepped forward, frost swirling around her suit in impossible patterns. The temperature dropped again, and the Arctic warrior's armor began to glow brighter. You still think this is about survival? She shook her head. We passed survival a long time ago. This is about justice. The Scary fired their weapons, not the controlled bursts from earlier battles, but desperate, continuous streams of absolute zero energy. The Arctic warriors walked through them as if they were spring breezes. Interesting fact about Earth wolves. Morrison commented casually, his suit's energy readings climbing higher. They don't just hunt in the cold. They use it. Track by breath condensation. Listen for ice cracking under prey's feet. The cold isn't their enemy. It's their partner. The station commander's crystalline form vibrated in frequencies that signaled growing panic. The children were necessary sacrifices for advancement. Every species must prove its worth through adversity. Funny you should mention adversity. Dr. Winters cut in. Colonel, the suits are at maximum absorption. Might I suggest a practical demonstration of human adaptation? Volkov raised her hand, and her team moved in perfect synchronization. The absorbed cold energy coursed through their suits' channels, focusing through specialized emitters in their palms. What happened next defied the Scary's understanding of physics. The concentrated cold struck with the force of an avalanche. The aliens' crystalline forms, engineered to thrive in extreme cold, couldn't handle the focused intensity of their own weapon turned against them. They didn't shatter this time. They imploded, their complex lattice structures collapsing into quantum dust. Ironic, Morrison observed as the last Scary disintegrated. They thought making it colder would save them. Quantum stillpoint reached, Dr. Winters reported. Station temperature is as low as physics allows, and our suits are still functioning at optimal levels. Volkov accessed the station's main controls through her augmented interface. Send the signal. Let every species know what we found here. And make sure they understand. This wasn't just vengeance for one human child. This was justice for all of them. As emergency beacons activated across the station, summoning medical ships from a dozen worlds, Volkov looked at the readings from her suit. The Scary had pushed the boundaries of cold to their absolute limit, and humanity had turned it into a weapon. They hadn't just survived the unsurvivable. They had mastered it. 3 days after the Arctic warriors' assault on the Scary station, representatives from 18 spacefaring races gathered in Earth's newly constructed diplomatic center in Geneva. The chamber was kept purposefully cold, a reminder of recent events that made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their environmental suits. Colonel Volkov stood before them in her full Arctic warrior regalia, frost patterns still dancing across her armor surface. Behind her, a holographic display showed the recovered children being reunited with their families across the galaxy. The Scary believed they were superior, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. They saw organic life as primitive, something to be studied and improved through their own twisted methods. They chose children as their subjects because they considered them the purest test samples. The Illyrian ambassador rose, his scales shimmering with barely contained emotion. My son still wakes screaming from nightmares of the cold. How did they hide this from us for so long? They used our own assumptions against us, Dr. Winters explained, stepping forward. No one believed organic life could function at those temperatures. No one thought to look for their victims in environments we considered impossibly hostile. Morrison activated another hologram, showing the Arctic warriors moving through the station's absolute zero corridors. Several delegates gasped as they watched humans not just surviving, but thriving in conditions that should have destroyed organic matter. This is humanity's message, Volkov continued. We didn't develop our cold adaptation technology because we feared the scary. We developed it because Earth itself challenged us to survive. Our planets, our environments, our evolution. These aren't limitations. They're foundations. The Centaurian representative's iridescent skin pulsed with curiosity. The patterns on your armor, they're not random, are they? They're reminders, Morrison answered. Every frost pattern tells the story of Earth's apex predators. Wolves that learned to hunt in blizzards. Bears that could sleep through winter. Humans who crossed ice ages with nothing but fur and fire. Dr. Winters brought up new data streams, showing the intricate workings of their suits. We didn't just copy Earth's cold-adapted life forms. We learned from them, combined their techniques, improved upon them. The scary thought dropping the temperature would stop us. They never understood that cold was our teacher long before it was our enemy. The children are all recovering, Volkov continued, her voice softening slightly. Emma Roberts will make a full recovery, as will most of the others. But this isn't just about healing. It's about prevention. She gestured, and the holograms shifted to show the shattered remains of the scary station. We left their civilization intact, this time. But our message is clear. Threaten our children. Threaten any children. And you'll learn why Earth's most dangerous predators evolved in the cold. The Proximan delegate, their secondary sensory organs fully extended, leaned forward. You could have destroyed their entire species with this technology. Why didn't you? Because that's another thing the scary never understood about us primitive organics, Morrison answered. We can be merciful. We choose to be merciful. But that choice must be earned and maintained. Volkov raised her hand, frost swirling around her fingers in a now familiar display. Humanity extends its protection to all the children of all spacefaring races. We've shared our medical data with your healing centers. We've provided templates for detecting scary cold masking technology. But most importantly, we've shown what happens when someone mistakes our adaptability for weakness. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity hadn't just defeated one of the most technologically advanced species in known space. They'd done it by turning the scary's greatest strength against them. Remember this, Volkov concluded, her armor's patterns shifting into the sharp, clean lines of Arctic predators on the hunt. We are not primitive because we are organic. We are not weak because we adapt. We are humanity. We learn to thrive in the cold, to hunt in the dark, to protect our young at any cost. She smiled, and several delegates were suddenly reminded that human expressions of friendship could also be displays of teeth. And we're always adapting. 6 months after the scary incident, Emma Roberts stood at the observation window of Earth's diplomatic center, watching snowflakes dance against the reinforced glass. Her recovery had been faster than anyone expected. Another example, the doctor said, of humanity's remarkable adaptability. The cold doesn't bother you anymore? Colonel Volkov asked, approaching quietly. She was out of her battle armor now, wearing a formal military uniform, though the Arctic warrior's wolf insignia still gleamed on her collar. No. Emma smiled, pressing her hand against the cold glass. Dad says I'm brave, but I think I just understand it better now. The cold, I mean. It's not good or bad. It just is. Volkov nodded, remembering the child they'd found in that sterile pod. The Emma before her now stood straighter, her eyes carrying a wisdom no 8-year-old should have to possess. The Scary sent another delegation, Volkov mentioned, watching Emma's reaction carefully. They're requesting permission to resume diplomatic relations. Did they learn? Emma's question carried none of the fear Volkov had expected, just curiosity. Oh yes, Lieutenant Morrison answered, joining them at the window. Their new leadership has instituted major reforms. All their research now requires multi-species oversight. They've even started studying Earth's cold-adapted life forms. Properly this time, with full ethical protocols. Dr. Winters appeared on the nearby holoscreen, her image slightly distorted by the secure quantum channel. The collaborative projects are actually yielding fascinating results. Turns out combining their crystalline technology with our organic adaptation principles opens up entirely new fields of science. Emma watched as more snow began to fall outside. The other children, are they all okay? Better than okay. Volkov smiled. The Illyrian boy is following in his father's diplomatic footsteps. The Centaurian girl is already showing signs of enhanced cold adaptation. Apparently their species can incorporate beneficial traits from survival experiences. The Proximan twins are leading their world's first xenobiology program. And you, Emma? Morrison asked gently. Still want to be an astronaut? Actually. Emma turned from the window, her eyes bright with purpose. I want to join the Arctic warriors. Not the fighting part, she added quickly, seeing their expressions. But the science part. Dr. Winters says I have a unique perspective on cold environment adaptation. The adults exchanged glances. They'd all seen the test results. Emma's exposure to the Scary's experiments had triggered unprecedented changes in her cellular structure. She could now perceive temperature variations that even their advanced suits couldn't detect. Your father might have something to say about that, Volkov said diplomatically. Dad already agreed. Emma grinned. He says if I'm going to change the galaxy, I should do it from a position of strength. Ulrich chimed softly. The first Scary diplomatic vessel since the incident was approaching Earth orbit. Under the new protocols, they would be escorted by ships from 3 different species, their environmental systems fully monitored. They're still afraid of us, Emma observed, watching the vessels approach on the external displays. Good, Morrison said firmly. Fear can be healthy. It teaches limits. But it's not just fear anymore, Volkov added. It's respect. Every spacefaring race now understands that humanity's primitive organic nature isn't a weakness. It's the source of our greatest strength. Emma nodded, her hand still pressed against the cold glass. We adapt. We protect. We survive. And we teach, Dr. Winters added from the screen. The galaxy's learning that cooperation beats confrontation. That understanding different approaches to survival makes everyone stronger. Outside, the snow fell harder, turning Geneva's modern skyline into something ancient and primal. Emma watched the flakes swirl in patterns that reminded her of the Arctic warrior's frost-covered armor. A cold new world, she murmured. But not a hostile one, Volkov replied, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Not anymore. As they stood there, watching Earth's winter embrace the city, news channels across the galaxy reported on the latest developments. Joint research projects, cultural exchange programs, and a new multi-species initiative to protect the rights of all children in explored space. The galaxy was changing, adapting, learning, just as humanity had always done. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, The wolves of winter stood ready, watching, protecting, ensuring that this cold new world remained a safer place for all.